interview with Tony Wagner, an educator, former K-8 principal, and author of multiple books on how schools can better prepare students for today's world. He describes dropping out of high school and college before graduating from an experimental college, and how that shaped his lifelong focus on making learning more relevant, engaging, and skill-centered. In our conversation, he draws on his work including the global achievement gap and his recent book, Mastery: Why Deeper Learning is Essential in an Age of Distraction, to argue that schools should prioritize competencies like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, and character over memorization and test scores. You can read more about Tony Wagner on our website, 6degrees.blog, and our Instagram page, 6degrees away. Thank you and enjoy the interview. So you spent more than a decade teaching and even worked as a K-8 principal. How did those early experiences shape your understanding of what really works in education?
Well, actually, my understanding of what works and what, more importantly, what doesn't work in education began with my experience as a student. I hated school. I dropped out of high school in my senior year, finally ended up at a kind of a last chance school. Then I dropped out of college twice, two different schools, before graduating from an experimental school. And so at an early age, I found myself very bored with school and just resenting the whole experience. And so once I had a very different kind of learning experience at this small experimental college where we were studying social problems. We lived in Mexico for a year. I wrote papers instead of having to take tests, had seminars and so on. Uh, in other words, a far more relevant kind of learning experience, more active, more engaged, more creative. That's what I wanted to have happen for my students. I decided to become a high school teacher because it was the 60s and I wanted to make a difference. And I wanted to create experiences for my students that would be very different than the experiences that I had had as a student. But to your question more directly, I spent nearly more than 12 years as a teacher. And that helped me kind of better understand, obviously, the challenges that educators face, but also the challenges that education leaders face. And the question that became more and more of interest to me once I figured out how to make my classroom work differently was how might I help a whole school or a school district uh, do things in ways that were much more engaging for students.
So you've said the role of education today is not just to teach content, but to help children learn. What does that look like in practice for teachers and students?
I just finished a book called Mastery: Why Deeper Learning is Essential in an Age of Distraction, where we really elaborate on the idea that what's most important now are developing essential skills. The world doesn't care how much you know anymore. AI knows far more than any of us collectively will ever know in a lifetime. What matters today is not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. And I have seen now for 25 years students leave high school and college with no skills. At the same time, employers are saying over and over and over again, I've got these people applying for jobs who have credentials from well-known schools and colleges. They can't write. They don't know how to think critically. They don't know how to collaborate. So what I've been writing about is how do we change a classroom to focus on skills using rich and challenging content. Content matters, but also how do we make learning more intrinsically interesting and motivating? You know, the world is really interested now in people who ask good questions. I mean, you look at what it takes to use AI effectively, writing good prompts, asking the right question. And so schools focus almost exclusively on getting the right answer. So there's a complete mismatch. And that's why I have long sort of developed practices as a teacher and then later as a school leader, where students would do their own research, asking their own questions, would engage in conversations around one another's work and other things that made learning much more intrinsically engaging and interesting.
Um, why do you believe skills like critical thinking and problem solving matter more today than memorizing content? And how should schools adapt to that shift?
Well, it's not just my opinion. You ask employers, whether for profit, nonprofit, you ask civic leaders, what are the skills that matter most today? I wrote a whole book 14 years ago called The Global Achievement Gap. Why even our best schools are not teaching the skills the students really need and what we can do about it. And I interviewed a wide variety of leaders, CEOs from businesses, from Apple to Unilever. I interviewed military leaders, one who later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I interviewed civic leaders, and all of them told me that what matters most today are a set of skills. I call them the 7 survival skills, but we could now distill them into what many of us now call the 5 C's: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity or creative problem solving, and character skills. And by character, I mean grit, perseverance, tenacity, self regulation, self discipline, an ethical and respectful stance in the world and worldview. All of these things matter today. Content, academic content is something you can learn just in time as opposed to just in case, right? Schools tell you, well, we're teaching this because just in case you might need it, as if you're ever going to use trigonometry, calculus, and the rest of that stuff they call just in case for the math curriculum. So, how you transform a classroom is what I've described in many, many books now. I've just finished my 8th book. And there are a variety of different ways to do it. But I think in general, it begins with identifying the skills that matter most. You can do that as a teacher and say, here are the 4 or 5 skills I'm really focused on in this course this year. And this is what I'm going to assess you on. I'm not going to assess you or test you on your capacity to memorize things and then forget them as soon as the test is over. That's a waste of everybody's time. What I'm going to assess is evidence of improvement in your skills for communication, oral and written communication, good listening, in your skills for collaboration, in your skills for critical thinking, and so on. So that's the first point. Identify skills and then develop a curriculum where you're going to actually sort of stretch those skills and assess those skills. I had students lead discussions of books. I had students pair up and actually choose books for the rest of the class to read to then lead discussion. So it was a very different class, really developing core skills. And then if you do that, you also have to fundamentally change testing or assessment. Oral presentations, what we call defenses of learning, um, are one sure way that people are not going to use AI to write an essay because that's just now short circuits the whole learning process when you do that. Although AI can be a very good coach if you've written a first draft, AI can help you make it better. But I think it's critical that you write that draft yourself. So anyway, those are some of the things that I I did as a teacher and that I describe others teachers and schools doing in my books.
In your book, The Global Achievement Gap, you describe the disconnect between what schools teach and what students actually need. What do you see as the biggest causes of that gap?
We have a curriculum that's 100 years old. It's really kind of that simple. It was created right at the turn of the 20th century, where learning was kind of fixed. There was a body of knowledge that everybody was supposed to acquire, and that body of knowledge wasn't supposed to change. Of course, now we have the exact opposite problem. We have information glut. We have constant change in what we think we know. How many planets are there today? I don't know. Is Pluto in or out? I've lost track, right? So that's just one example. Uh, Back in the beginning of the 20th century, not only was knowledge fixed, but we wanted to standardize learning, make it the same for everybody because we had this problem of new immigrants coming in and needing to teach everybody. And so we created a kind of factory assembly line model of learning. Everybody gets the same content at the same time. And the grade is really determines how much you've retained that knowledge for the test, but also how quickly you've acquired that knowledge. That's all it's about. So it's sorting people based on quickness, which bears no relationship to the skills that matter as an adult. You're not graded as an adult on how quick you are or how much you can spit back that you've memorized and then you forget it as soon as the test is over. No, that's not how the world works, especially today. Whereas I mentioned, AI can give you a wealth of information if you know how to ask the right question, if you know how to write a good prompt. And then the question is, how do you apply knowledge? How do you use knowledge to create something new, to ask a better question, to solve a problem? Those are the skills that matter most today. That's what will get you a good job, not good grades, not not a better college credential. More and more employers are turning away from all of those indices of what we think good schools should look like and what a good student is, saying, well, that doesn't tell me whether that person knows how to collaborate, think critically. All that tells me is that a student served their seat time in a prescribed number of courses for a prescribed number of years. And so here's your certificate of seat time served. It's useless in today's world. Useless.
Yep. Of the seven survival skills you identified, which ones do schools have the hardest time teaching effectively, and why?
Pretty much all of them, because schools are focused on transmitting a body of academic content knowledge. That's how teachers and schools see their job. That's what parents expect. That's what parents think colleges want. That's what college uh, admissions officers say they still want. So it's a broken system that completely is self-reinforcing. So the heart of the issue, as I've said, is that what matters today is not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. It's skills, including character skills. And we don't teach or assess these skills. And the kinds of standardized tests relied on for college admissions, like ACTs or SATs, or the state accountability tests, only make the system worse and more perverse. When you test the wrong things, you're creating a perverse incentive for teachers to teach the wrong things. So that only just makes the system more and more dysfunctional.
More than 15 years after writing The Global Achievement Gap, where have you seen progress, and where do you think schools are still falling short?
I've seen a lot of progress at the margins. There's a lot to be said for and against charter schools, but what they did enable in some circumstances was a lot of what I call educational R&D, research and development. They loosened regulations to the extent that charter schools could have a different kind of curriculum, weren't always beholden to a battery of standardized tests, and so could try new things. And so there's an enormous amount more experimentation going on in schools right now today than there was when I first wrote The Global Achievement Gap. I was hard pressed to find a few examples to highlight in that book of schools teaching what matters most. But today, you know, I for my newest book, Mastery, I could have cited hundreds and hundreds of great examples. The problem, though, is these schools are existing in a dual system. They still have to, at least to some degree, kind of, as the old saying goes, render unto Caesar that which is due, meaning they've got to translate their competency transcript, their mastery transcript into grades for college or even for the next school. And they have to make other kinds of compromises, which is crippling in a lot of ways. But the heart of the matter is there's a lot more R&D going on now. It's much easier to find great examples of really interesting, outstanding schools today than it was 15 years ago.
In creating innovators, you highlight the importance of play, passion, and purpose. How can parents and schools put those ideas into practice to support young people?
That's a wonderful question because that's kind of goes back to uh, what we have in common as human beings. We are born curious, creative, imaginative. The average 5-year-old asks 100 questions a day. I know because I now have grandchildren who ask me lots of questions. But the longer you're in school, the more that curiosity withers. Why? Because you don't have time to ask your own questions. You're not even allowed in some classes to ask your own questions. You have to play this game of guess what's on the teacher's mind. You know, what kinds of questions will the teacher answer and not what kinds of questions interest you. So what I think for nurturing play, that begins with encouraging and nurturing the innate curiosity we are born with. And as you experiment and explore, you develop interests, right? So from play, we evolve and we begin to explore interests, probably much in the way that you began sort of messing around with interviews and then sort of getting interested in kind of pursuing this and seeing who else you can track down and what you can learn from them. So your random play became a more purposeful play in the pursuit of an interest. Now, interests in time can grow into genuine passions. You know, maybe you'll someday become a journalist out of this experience because of the burning passion of this work. But passion isn't enough. Over and over again, as I've interviewed uh, young people, what I found is that their passions, in the best of circumstance, evolve into a deeper sense of purpose, a desire to give back and to make a difference. So that's the evolution of play to passion to purpose. And ultimately, purpose becomes kind of the ultimate expression of adult play, of disciplined play.
A th- sorry, a theme in creating innovators is learning from failure. How can schools create environments where students feel safe to take risks and learn from mistakes?
Well, first of all, let's get the F word out of schools, not the one that's already banned. Failure. I think it's a dirty word. I really do. Do we talk about a kid who can't speak in complete sentences when they're first learning to talk as a failure? You know, what, mumbles and stutters and just says a couple of words. Oh, shut up until you can speak a full sentence. For Christ's sake, stop that. Do we make fun of people when they are learning to ride a bike and they fall over and they say, "Oh, well, you failed. Clearly, we're not going to allow you to ride a bike ever again." No, no, take that thing away from him. No, learning is trial and error. That is how human beings learn. So the only three grades I justify are A, B, or incomplete. I think a B should mean you have met the performance standards for this course. You've learned the skills to a certain level of proficiency that means you've earned a credit. Now, an A, I think, should be reserved for real excellence, which is not common. But if you have not yet met the standard, I think your work should just be considered incomplete. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer. Maybe you need a little more coaching or support. Some people take, how many times do some people need to take a driver's license before they finally pass, right? Same deal. We don't say, okay, you failed your driver's license. Nope, never again. You passed, you failed that course. We're going to go on now to truck driving school. See how you do with that. Oh, you failed that. Well, now we'll try airplane school. Oh my God, you really failed that. We don't do that to people. We don't make them feel like failures when they're learning new things. Why should we do that in school? Why? What purpose does it serve?
Yeah. If you could redesign schools from the ground up for today's world, what would be the most important changes compared to the traditional model we have now?
Well, first of all, I designed school more like scouting. Were you ever in scouting, Boy Scouts, that kind
No,
of
I've
stuff?
never.
Well, I'm sure you've had friends who were in scouting. And in scouting, you were in merit badges, right? So what do you have to do to earn a camping merit badge, say, as a Boy Scout? Well, you don't take a multiple choice test on the parts of a tent. You don't study the history of camping and pass a test on that. No, it's about skills. You have to know first aid. Sure, okay, that's content. You have to know navigation. Good, that's content. But more importantly, you have to lead a trip. You have to plan the menus. You have to figure out the route. You have to figure out what first aid equipment you need to bring along. In other words, you have to demonstrate mastery. That's what this new book is all about, mastery. And if you're a Cub Scout, there's one level of mastery. Scout, another level. Eagle Scout, yet another level. More where you have to demonstrate a higher level of skillfulness, more different kinds of skills. So that's what I think school should be. They should be a collection of required and elective merit badges that become progressively more challenging as you grow older. I would, and again, there's no room for failure in that system. What there is trial and error. What there is teachers who are coaches, teachers who are mentors, not judges, but teachers who really like a good coach on a sports team or in theater or in music or in the arts coaches you to a higher performance standard. Instead of the sage on stage, it's a teacher who is the guide on the side. So those are two fundamentally different things I would change. You know, the nature of how we learn, how we structure learning, and the nature of teaching.
The documentary Most Likely to Succeed has been shown in thousands of communities. What impact have you seen from these screenings? And did they lead to real changes in schools or communities?
Well, you really should best interview Ted Dintersmith about that because he was the executive producer of the film. I was the education advisor. But from what I saw, it has had and continues to have a profound influence. Here, it really describes in depth the student experience in a school that I profiled in the Global Achievement Gap. But he spends 90 minutes in the school and it really comes alive in the film. Have you seen the film?
No, I have not.
Oh, you should see it. You can find it easily online. But at any rate, what it did was give people a real picture of a completely different kind of school and different kind of learning experience. You can't change on a because there's a new you can't change your learning. You can't change teaching. You can't change schools because somebody has a new pet theory they've written a book about. No, it's that feels too risky. You have to be able to see it, touch it, smell it, taste it. You know, when I've led teams of educators to go visit this school called High Tech High, they come away transformed, absolutely transformed in ways that my book could only introduce them to. And it was the same with the movie. You really get what's called an existence proof, a clear example of a radically different and radically better learning experience for all students. That's profoundly transformative.
What do you see as the biggest barrier standing in the way of meaningful education reform, and how can those barriers be overcome?
Well, I think the accountability movement that we have has been a huge setback for education. You know, we don't test what matters most. We don't test skills. We use low-level factual recall tests that are scored by computers because they're cheap. They're easy to make and easy to score, not because they're truly worthwhile. So what gets tested is all that gets taught. We've created a kind of testing mania where teachers have this tremendous anxiety that they or their schools or both will be judged by the communities according to their test scores. Students have the same anxiety. They fear that, if they only get a 500 on each of the SATs, They're losers. They're destined to fail forever. Well, I'll tell you something. I'll admit something. As you know, I've had a master's and a doctorate from Harvard. I've published 8 books. Guess what my SAT scores were?
I'm assuming it wasn't as high as people would think.
520s,
Oh, wow.
right? 520s, nowhere near 600s or
Yeah.
any of the rest of that. Those tests do not tell you anything of real value. So that's the first problem we have. We have an accountability system that is seriously broken. Now, I believe in accountability, and there's whole different ways in which we could approach accountability, but that's conversation for another time. So that's the most serious impediment right now to education reforms and to R&D. Teachers are afraid. They're afraid to try anything new because they'll come down on their neck. Their test scores will go down. They might even lose their job, or their schools will get a bad name or worse. But then the other problem is how we prepare teachers. We create learning environments for teachers that replicate the kinds of learning environments they had as students, where they sit and they get, even at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I went for a Master of Arts in Teaching, the courses that I took were useless. They in no way prepared me for teaching. I graduated with a degree and a teacher certification that meant absolutely nothing. It took me 5 years to learn how to be a good teacher, 5 years of working alone and trial and error. So that's the problem. We're not preparing teachers adequately, and then we don't give them really effective supports in their learning on the job. Teaching is one of the most isolated professions in modern work life. Teachers work alone all day, every day. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. Isolation is the enemy of innovation. Innovation is a team sport. So we have to create a very different kind of learning environments, both in the preparation of teachers and in supporting teachers while they're in their careers. So those are two of the really big changes that I think are essential if we're going to meaningfully transform learning.
Your upcoming book focuses on deeper learning. Why is deeper learning especially important now? And how is it different from what most students experience in school?
Well, by deeper learning, I really do mean mastery of the competencies, the skills that matter most. Mastery is the primary title of the book. And that's in contrast to what I see as kind of fragmented, distracted learning. We live in an attention economy where we are bombarded with alerts, infotainment, and information that frequently makes no sense to us. We have a hard time understanding what's important or even what's true. And our education system only perpetuates that problem with fragmented snippets of knowledge and information without any coherence, without any grounding, without skills. Once again, it's not what you know, it's what you can do with what you know. So that's what the book Mastery is about, is how do you create learning around core competencies? What does it look like at the elementary level, middle school, high school, college, graduate school, and even in the workplace? So we provide dozens of examples of what a radically different kind of mastery-based learning can look like.
With artificial intelligence and other new technologies rapidly changing society, do you feel more hopeful about their potential to improve education or more concerned about the risks they pose?
Much more concerned, deeply, deeply concerned. I see AIs having no guardrails, and I don't see students who are asking tough questions when they're using AI. They're using it to create shortcuts. And I get it because school is boring and the assignments are boring. And if I had mostly boring classes, I'd probably take shortcuts too. Instead, I just didn't do the homework. That was my solution to student, which I don't recommend. That didn't work out so well for me, except later it did. But at any rate, my point is that I think AI is an incredible potential threat. In the short term, it's a threat to every college graduate's jobs. Right now, today, there's something like 35% of new college grad jobs, entry level jobs, we call them, disappeared in a year and a half. 35% gone. Unemployment rate among college grads is at 10%. That's unemployment. But if you ask what is the underemployment rate, now by underemployment, that is measures the numbers of people or percentages of college grads who have jobs that don't require a college degree and don't pay college graduate wages. I'm talking Uber, I'm talking bartender, sales clerk, you get it, right? That number of college graduates who are underemployed approaches 50%. So, and that's not even to talk about kids who've dropped out of college, who never completed, or kids who never went to any kind of post-secondary school. So it's a funnel. And you start with 100 kids in ninth grade, maybe 90 graduate. We don't know what happens to the other 10 to 12. All right, now you've got 56 or 90. 56 go to college. The other 40 or 35 lost. We do a terrible job of offering meaningful choices for students in high school. So we got 56 going to college, right? Remember it was 100 a little while ago, right? Out of that 56, about 25 finish college. That's it. 25 to 28. The rest drop out. All right. Now, of that 28, how many get a job that pays a BA wage? 12, 13. So the whole system is rigged for 12 kids out of 100 who benefit from it. All the rest get sorted out all along the way. And mind you, the majority of kids who drop out of college and who also graduate from college have enormous debt that follows them throughout their lives. Big article in the recent Wall Street Journal about the numbers of adults ages 50 and 60 years old who have $100,000 of debt for college because all they've been able to do is pay off some of the interest, never the principal. So the interest keeps accruing and they keep going deeper and deeper in debt. And there's no way they're going to ever be able to pay it off. And they can't declare bankruptcy because that does not eliminate college debt. What's a person to do? It's horrible. Now that your question was around AI, but my point is already today, the unemployment and underemployment for recent college graduates is really grim, and it's only going to get worse with AI. And then you layer on top of that the fears that people have that artificial general intelligence could run amok, that it would be artificial intelligence learning how to make itself better and how to gain more and more control from its programmers because it's self-programming now. We don't know what it would do. Already today, we have examples of AI that threatened its programmers when the programmer said, well, I think we maybe will discontinue this line of research with this AI. Or the AI was heard to programmers to say something in effect of erasing it and start over. I can't remember the details. But the AI wrote its programmer a text or email saying, I know about your extracurricular activities. In other words, affairs, extramarital affairs, and I'm going to reveal them if you dare touch me. So we already have these few examples that are really scary. And yet we have zero guardrails, and we're not raising a generation of young people who know how to create those guardrails.
Looking 20 years into the future, what would success look like to you? How will we know if we have truly transformed education to meet the needs of the next generation?
First of all, the generation will be happier. They'll feel more fulfilled. They'll feel that they're learning and their life has more purpose. Too many young people today go to school, they're going through the motions. If they show up at all, as you know, Truancy is an epidemic in schools today. And when they show up, they're disengaged, they're bored, or they're anxious, or both. So first and foremost, to me, the outcome I would seek are kids who enjoy learning, kids who feel fulfilled and engaged, who feel that learning has purpose, has value, has meaning, is engaging, is worth doing. And then secondly, in the process of doing engaging learning, these young people will have the skills to have meaningful work, to make a contribution in the workplace, to make a contribution as civic leaders, to be active and informed citizens who know how to ask tough, critical questions about people who are running for office, or to look critically at what a politician says and can ask, well, is this true? How do we know? And finally, who can find an adult life that gives them joy and meaning. So for me, the purpose of education really is three things: preparation for productive work, preparation for active and informed civic life, and for a life of personal fulfillment, of health and well-being. So all those to me are three indicators that I would look for an education system that was succeeding. And right now, today, we have clear indicators that our education system is failing in all three domains.
And I have one last question that we ask all of our interviewees, and it is, how do you define success?
I think success is the wrong word. I would instead say what we need to ask is, what do you need to thrive? Success depends on the individual, really does. Whereas thriving should be a universal aspiration. For some people, successful mean having, wonderful kids, having great families. For other people, success is making a meaningful contribution in the school. For other people, success is making a couple $1 million. I mean, that is so kind of culturally and personally kind of variable. It's a meaningless yardstick. Oh, he was very successful. He screwed a lot of people and made a lot of money. Sorry, but that's how some people see it, right? Um, no. Let's ask the question, what does it take to enable human beings to thrive and to live meaningful lives?